muscle, first of all, cardiac muscle is found only in the heart. You don't see it anywhere else. It is striped, it is striated, and cardiac and skeletal, they look very similar. The major difference really, this is skeletal muscle, this is cardiac muscle. The major difference is how they branch. Cardiac muscle cells branch. Also, cardiac muscle cells have only 1 to 2 nuclei in their cells, which means they do not form by. How do skeletal muscles form?
Fusion.
Fusion, right? So if you only have 1 to 2 nuclei, do they form by fusion? No, they don't fuse. Okay? So skeletal muscle obviously is larger and longer. Cardiac muscle cells have a central nucleus and they are branched. And cardiac muscles have intercalated discs. These are really important to the functioning of cardiac muscle. The intercalated discs are basically 2 cell junctions found together. 2 cell junctions found together. One of them is desmosomes. What do desmosomes do?
Produce.
2 words, starting with a T. Tensile strength. Desmosomes give you tensile strength. And gap junctions. What do gap junctions do?
Synchronous.
Synchrony, right? Communicate. They connect cytoplasms together. So you've got both of them in the same place. So an intercalated disc is desmosomes and gap junctions together. Cardiac muscles do not receive neuromuscular junctions. They do not receive motor neurons. Cardiac muscle cells do not receive motor neurons. They do receive neurons, but they don't receive motor neurons. And their contraction is not dependent on neurons. Cardiac muscle contraction is not dependent on neurons. Makes sense. As an embryo, heart develops first. Nervous system develops a lot later. Okay? So cardiac muscle is very autonomous. It's very independent. But it can be influenced by the nervous system. You have to read that sentence very carefully. Cardiac muscle does not depend on the nervous system for its contractions. Skeletal muscle does, 100%. No nerve, no muscle contraction in skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle is not like that. It doesn't depend on skeletal muscle, but it can be influenced, it can be influenced by nerves. Influenced by nerves. Okay? Specifically, the autonomic nervous system. Okay? So the 2 types of fibers are contractile fibers. Contractile cardiac muscle is what pumps the blood. That's its job. Contractile cardiac muscle is what pumps. That's what generates the force. And then you got autorhythmic fibers. That would be your pacemaker of the heart. And you guys will talk a lot more about it in B. Okay? We're not covering that here. So those are the 2 types of cardiac muscle. Pacemaker, or autorhythmic is the more correct term. Autorhythmic fibers and contractile fibers. There's a lot of similarity between them and a lot of differences. So both contractile and autorhythmic fibers, okay, use electricity. They both require calcium to contract, okay? And you should not say they're both found in the heart. That's way too easy. Like many people said, osteoprogenitor cells and osteoblasts are both found in the bone. Well, big surprise, right? That's not an acceptable similarity. I will not give you any credit for that if you put that down. Okay? So don't give me really obvious similarities. Think a little harder, okay? So that's really important. So in terms of similarities here. And they're both involuntary. That's another similarity. Okay? So what are the differences? Autorhythmic fibers generate electricity. Autorhythmic fibers generate electrical impulses rhythmically, that's why they're called autorhythmic. And contractile fibers respond to that electricity. Autorhythmic fibers generate the electrical signals, and contractile fibers respond to those electrical signals. So, calcium really comes from two sources in the cardiac muscle. Just like smooth muscle, it comes from two sources. Calcium comes from where in skeletal muscle? Only one source, SR. It only comes from SR. In the heart, about 20% of calcium comes from the outside of the cell. Where does the other 80% come from? From sarcoplasmic reticulum. And at rest, the fibers are usually shorter than their optimum length. Only 75% contracted. 75% of the original length, I mean. Okay? So they're quite short, okay? And they use creatine phosphate. So the phosphagen system is found in the heart. Phosphagen system is found in the heart also. So when people take creatine as a supplement to grow muscles, you're affecting your heart also. Remember that. And if your heart hypertrophies, okay, that can lead to a severe coronary. You can't have that. Does that make sense? So think before you put anything in your mouth. Okay. So anaerobic pathways normally provide ATP. The heart does not go through anaerobic pathways. If your heart does not have oxygen, you're in deep doo-doo. Okay? And yes, you can write that on the exam. You are in deep doo-doo. If your heart does not have oxygen, it's bye-bye time. Okay? I don't care what organ has oxygen or not. If your heart and liver don't have oxygen, it's over. Okay? So there is no anaerobic pathways. And the action potential lasts hundreds of milliseconds. It's very, very slow compared to skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is 100 times faster. Makes sense, you're pumping 5 liters of fluid. Do you want to contract it in 2 seconds? Hello? No, you take your time. Right? You want to be slow. Okay? Wave summation is impossible in cardiac muscle because there is no neuromuscular junction. There is no neuromuscular junction. Only if you have a neuromuscular junction, you can have wave summation. Otherwise, wave summation is not possible. And calcium comes from outside. Okay? And the calcium coming from the outside will open the calcium channels on the SR. Does that make sense? What opens calcium channels in the SR and skeletal muscle? Action potentials. I see a few whisperings. So action potentials open them, right? From acetylcholine, greater potential, then action potential. That's what open calcium channels on the SR. In cardiac muscle, calcium comes in. When calcium comes in, do you depolarize? Oh, man, big time. You will depolarize big time. Calcium is 2+. Right? It's a very powerful ion. Calcium comes in, of course you're going to depolarize. And that opens calcium from the outside is what opens the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So calcium comes out from the SR. Okay, nervous system again modifies the rate but does not initiate the AP, and I've already told you about this. So. Any questions on cardiac muscle? Again, it's a very fundamental introduction to it. You'll go through a lot more detail during the week.
Could you go over the action potential and the acetylcholine part again?
So the nerves don't go into cardiac muscle fibers. Okay, so acetylcholine is not released into cardiac muscle fibers directly, right? Cardiac muscle contracts because of electricity. That's why you can take a defibrillator and put it on the chest and the heart will start up again, right? You cannot do that to your muscle. You put a defib on your muscle will barbecue, okay? Because you need acetylcholine. So because there's no acetylcholine, there's no wave summation.
So the acetylcholine is only in the skeletal system?
Yes.
And the smooth muscle system?
Yes, but having said that, acetylcholine does have effects in all three types of muscle. In skeletal muscle, you need it. In cardiac muscle, acetylcholine will slow down the pacemaker. And in smooth muscle, acetylcholine in some smooth muscles can cause contraction, and in some smooth muscles can inhibit contraction. So it has effects. Acetylcholine will have effects, but motor neurons are only found in skeletal muscle. They are not found anywhere else. Okay, so what's the deal with smooth muscle? Smooth muscle is not striated. It still contracts and produces forces, okay? And it's very different shape-wise. It's very spindle-shaped, so everybody see this diagram here? It's very spindle-shaped, okay? It looks like this. And it's one central nucleus, so no fusing. There are no striations. Does that mean it doesn't have sarcomeres? There's no striations, which means it doesn't have any sarcomeres. True or false? If it doesn't have sarcomeres, how does it contract? False. Of course it has sarcomeres. The sarcomeres are not parallel. Remember, that's what striated means. Striated means all the sarcomeres are parallel. They're nicely organized. In smooth muscle, you have sarcomeres. Without sarcomeres, you cannot contract. You have sarcomeres, but they're not organized in a parallel way. There are no neuromuscular junctions, and it's highly involuntary. It's very hard to control smooth muscle consciously. And there are no T-tubules. T-tubules are found in cardiac muscle. They're also found in skeletal muscle. We have them in both. But no T-tubules in smooth muscle. Okay? And here's something that I will ask on the lab exam. Guaranteed. Skeletal muscle has epimysium, perimysium, and endomysium. Everybody knows that. Smooth muscle and cardiac muscle only have endomysium. They do not have peri or epi because there are no fascicles. Only if you have fascicles, you need perimysium. There are no fascicles. In cardiac muscle and smooth muscle, you will only find endomysium. You will not find the other two. I would write that down. That's an important question on the lab exam. In smooth muscle, you've got what's called calmodulin, which is sensitive to calcium. Calmodulin is a protein.
So what is the endomysium on?
Endomysium covers the individual fibers. Just like skeletal muscle, it covers all the individual fibers. But the fibers are not found as fascicles. Okay, so there is no troponin, tropomyosin in smooth muscle. There is troponin, tropomyosin in cardiac muscle. There is no troponin, tropomyosin in smooth muscle. Not at all. And remember, myosin in skeletal muscle is always found as what? Myosin head is always blank. Cocked. Myosin is always found in the high energy position in skeletal muscle and in cardiac muscle also. Okay. But in smooth muscle, that is not the case. Myosin is in the rest position. Now there are two types of smooth muscle. You've got what's called visceral. Viscera means meat, inside meat. So visceral smooth muscle, and that's also called single unit smooth muscle. So guys, what do you think it functions like? Look at the name, single unit. The entire muscle works as one unit. So if I start contraction of one fiber, what happens? They all contract. So what type of cell junctions would you expect here? Thank you.
What was the answer?
Gap junctions, plenty of gap junctions. Okay? Multi-unit. What does that mean?
Many.
Several independent units, right? If they're all independent from each other, are they connected by gap junctions? No, don't want that, right? Think about blood vessels, you guys. If I'm constricting my blood vessels in the brain, do you want all the blood vessels in the body to constrict? No, you want them to function as separate units. Okay? So, multi-unit and single unit, they both have gap junctions. But multi-unit has very, very few. Much fewer. Okay? Single unit has many, many more. So on the exam, if you write down multi-unit has no gap junctions, I'll still give you credit. Okay? They're so few that you can say that they don't have any. It's fine with me. It's accurate enough. So smooth muscle does have a sarcomere. I told you smooth muscle contracts. So it does have a sarcomere. It does have sarcomeres, but the sarcomeres are very, very randomly arranged. They're not arranged in a proper way. And so forces are exerted everywhere. So when you exert a force in many directions, the force becomes really weak, correct? It's not directed towards one place, so it becomes weak. And when smooth muscle contracts, this is what it looks like. It crumples up like paper. Okay, when smooth muscle contracts, it crumples. Okay? Okay, so you've got voltage-gated calcium channels in the plasma membrane. Calcium comes in from the outside and then opens the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The usual, the same as cardiac muscle. Calcium comes in from the outside and opens the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay? And smooth muscle responds to multiple neurotransmitters, including acetylcholine. So what's the similarity of all three muscle types? Listen to my question carefully. What's the similarity to all, give me two similarities to all three muscle types. Don't tell me force generation. Too easy. Give me two good similarities. What do they all require? Calcium. Okay? And they all utilize a sarcomere. Correct? They all utilize sarcomeres. And they all require calcium. Okay? And they're all influenced by acetylcholine, correct? Acetylcholine can affect all of them. In skeletal muscle, acetylcholine is required, but in the heart and in smooth muscle, acetylcholine can have effects. It has slow myosin ATPase, so comment on the rate of contraction. The rate of contraction in smooth muscle will be very slow. Okay, good. And there are no Z discs, instead you have dense bodies. So Z discs are not there, so actin is fixed to dense bodies. Instead of, remember in skeletal muscle, actin was, and in cardiac, actin is connected to Z disc. There are no Z discs, instead you have dense bodies.
Sorry, for which two? There's either.
Skeletal and cardiac. And caveoli right here. Those are the white channels all over the cell. Those are your caveoli. Caveoli take the place of T tubules. They conduct current. Caveoli help conduct current through the electrically excitable membrane. So another similarity. All three muscle types have electrically excitable membranes. True or false?
Yes.
True. Okay. See, I've given you 4 similarities already.
Did you say that so the single, so the one that they all work at the same time.
Synchrony.
Synchrony. Those ones would not have partial contraction at all times.
They should. So tone, thank you for raising that question. The question was, will muscles that are single unit, do they have partial contractions? Okay? So unless stimulated, these muscles will not contract. So there's no tone. Does that make sense? They don't have a tone. Not the same idea as skeletal muscle. They don't have that type of phenomenon. So how does smooth muscle, how does it contract? This only gives you half the story, so I'm going to give you the other half. So hormones and neurotransmitters will bind their receptors. Okay, so write that on the board. So smooth muscle contraction, this is half the story and the other half is here. So smooth muscle contraction. Smooth muscle contraction. So hormone or neurotransmitter, okay, binds receptor. You increase cyclic AMP or cyclic GMP depending on what organ. Okay. These then open calcium channels on the plasma membrane. And then the story continues. Okay? So once calcium channels open in the membrane, calcium comes in. And when calcium comes in, that causes the calcium channels on the sarcoplasmic reticulum to open because you have depolarization, they're voltage gated. That's another similarity. All 3 muscle types have voltage gated calcium channels on their SR. Correct? Okay, and then the calcium binds and activates calmodulin. It turns on calmodulin, just like how calcium turned on troponin. Okay, you turn on calmodulin. Calmodulin will activate a kinase. Okay, I'm going to give you the name of this kinase. Okay, it's called myosin light chain kinase. I need you to know that. Myosin light chain kinase, or MLCK. Myosin light chain kinase. So the kinase here is myosin light chain . So all kinases add a phosphate group, that's their job. They will add a phosphate to their target. So myosin light chain kinase will add a phosphate to the myosin head and then cox it. And once the myosin light chain is conked, how do you think muscle contracts? By sliding filament. That's another similarity between all 3 muscles. They all contract by the sliding filament mechanism. The smooth muscle also contracts by sliding filament, but how you get there varies. fact I wanted to mention here, there is an enzyme called phosphatase. There are phosphatases that remove the phosphate off the myosin head. If you remove phosphate off the myosin head, how did you remove phosphate off the myosin head from skeletal muscle? Power stroke, right? When actin bound, the phosphate fell off, right? But here that's not the case, okay? The actin will bind, the phosphate stays on, okay? Phosphate is removed by an enzyme. You need a special enzyme to remove the phosphate. So the phosphate is removed by phosphatase, and that helps end the contraction. That's what helps end the contraction in smooth muscle, is you need an enzyme to remove the phosphate off the myosin. Oops.
Sorry, could you go back to that one slide? Where's the phosphatase at?
So the phosphatase will remove this phosphate right here. So this is how you spell phosphatase. P-H-O-S. Ends smooth muscle contraction. Okay, so what are some of the differences between multi-unit and single unit? So single unit found in hollow organs like the digestive, the uterus, stomach, and so on. Okay, bladder. Okay, pacemaker potentials are very important. So just like cardiac muscle, okay, smooth muscle, single unit smooth muscle also has pacemakers. They're linked by gap junctions. They're electrical synapses. So they're all linked, all the cells are linked. It receives both sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation. Sympathetic is fight or flight. So if you're in an emergency situation, okay, sympathetic is associated with adrenaline or epinephrine. They both are the same thing. Adrenaline or epinephrine. Okay? So sympathetic, it's important for you to know anyway. So I'll write this out. So sympathetic, okay, is epinephrine or adrenaline. Okay, parasympathetic is our favorite, acetylcholine. I told you, acetylcholine is the most important neurotransmitter in the body. Some visceral smooth muscle can divide, and visceral smooth muscle relaxes when you stretch it. Think about it, when there's a baby in the uterus, you don't want the uterus to snap like a rubber band, right? You want it to relax. As the baby is growing, you want the uterus to keep relaxing and relaxing and relaxing until eventually the baby just wants to be born, okay? So visceral, same thing with your stomach. You don't want the stomach to snap, right? Once you put food in, you want the stomach to relax, right? So it can digest. So that's visceral smooth muscle. Multi-unit is not like that. It will snap, okay? It actually contracts when stretched. If you stretch it, it's gonna snap back like a rubber band. And that's what you want when you're conducting blood. You don't want blood vessels to keep on just, expanding. Otherwise, blood will never go anywhere. Right? If you want blood to circulate, you want multi-unit. Okay? There are no pacemakers for multi-unit, okay? And they only receive sympathetic innervation, no parasympathetic. Only sympathetic. Okay, that's very important for B. Okay? And they contract when stretched. And we're done. Look at the time. How perfect is that? That's so